This story is about my uncle who got married for the first time in his late 30s. For their honeymoon, he, his new wife, and her daughter, who has special needs and is truly remarkable, decided to stay in a cabin at Mount Hood in Oregon. They rented the cabin, unpacked their things, and settled in for a 3-day vacation. On the last night, my uncle was up late watching TV. His wife and stepdaughter had already gone to bed, but he needed to use the bathroom. After using the bathroom, he came out, and the only light on in the cabin was from the TV in the living room. It was bright enough to light up most of the living room and part of the hallway. As he walked out of the bathroom, he saw his wife heading toward the kitchen. He thought she had woken up hungry, so he decided to follow her. He walked quietly behind her, and when she reached the end of the hallway, she slightly turned toward the kitchen before suddenly darting into it at an impossible speed, faster than any human could run. The figure was wearing a long white nightgown, just like the one his wife had worn to bed, and had shoulder-length hair. Feeling uneasy, he stepped back and peeked into the bedroom where his wife and stepdaughter were sleeping. To his shock, both were sound asleep in bed. Needless to say, he was shaken, and he couldn't sleep after that. The next morning, they left the cabin. Later, he called the person who had rented them the cabin and said, "You didn't mention the cabin was haunted." The man responded, "Oh, so you saw her, huh?" My uncle hadn't told him about seeing the woman, confirming that a fast-moving female ghost was haunting the cabin. He later admitted that if the ghost had turned to look at him, he probably would have completely lost his composure right then and there. I never really wanted to go in the first place. Let me take you back about 6 years. My girlfriend had this idea that she wanted to rent a cabin in the woods. She was totally against camping because she thought a flimsy tent between you and the outdoors wasn't appealing. But a cabin, a sturdy wooden structure, that seemed like something she could handle. After weeks of her telling me how amazing it would be, I finally agreed to what was supposed to be a wonderful stay in a log cabin. It took us a couple of weeks to get everything together, but eventually, we packed our things into the car and drove for about 5 hours to this secluded cabin. It was a 3-hour drive followed by another 2 hours driving through the wilderness to get to the location. To be honest, she picked this place mainly for the Instagram pictures, but when we arrived, we were let down. What was once a beautiful spot had fallen into neglect over the years, poorly maintained, and ultimately disappointing. As you might guess, things didn't start well. My girlfriend and I weren't thrilled, but we were too tired from the trip to demand a refund for a 2-night stay, so we decided to make the best of it and just go to bed. That's when we found something that really bothered me. The bed sheets seemed like they hadn't been changed in ages. It's one thing for a place to be run down, but when it's dirty, that's another issue. Naturally, when we checked our phones, there was no signal. So, much to our frustration, we took off the sheets and slept directly on the bare mattress. As you can imagine, it was a pretty uncomfortable night, not just because of the mattress or the cabin's disappointing state, but also because of the noises. I didn't expect it, but as I tossed and turned, I kept hearing noises. It sounded like animals or something moving above us. The cabin had an attic space, but from what I could tell, it wasn't connected to our cabin. We had a flashlight, and though my girlfriend was too scared to check, I went ahead and looked around to see if there was a hatch or anything where the noise could be coming from. Honestly, I wasn't excited about running into a wild animal in the dark. After searching for a while, I found nothing and decided it was best to just try to ignore the sounds and get some sleep. The next morning, we woke up, got ready, and went on one of the hikes my girlfriend had promised me. It was an exhausting trek, but I'd recommend spending some time in nature once in a while. We spent about 6 hours walking, enjoying ourselves, but we were absolutely wiped out when we returned. We took off our shoes, laughing and chatting when we noticed something that completely killed the mood. Our food, which we had neatly arranged in the small kitchen, had been tampered with. The door to the cabin was locked, just as the owner had advised, though he mentioned it wasn't really necessary because the place was so isolated. Still, we locked it just to be safe from wild animals, but someone had clearly gone through our food. It wasn't the way a wild animal would tear into something. No, this was different. Someone had carefully opened the food packages as though they were trying not to make a mess. The problem was, we had been counting on those granola bars after our hike. When we found the box open with 3 bars missing, we immediately realized something wasn't right. That's when we started to really get nervous. In our minds, it was clear someone had been inside the cabin. Then, I remembered the noises from the night before, and it all started to make sense. Could there have been someone living in this remote area, and we just happened to stumble upon their territory? Maybe they'd taken the opportunity to steal some food. As you can imagine, I felt a deep sense of unease, and my girlfriend and I quietly discussed what to do. It almost felt like the place was being watched, like there were ears everywhere, and someone was keeping an eye on us. I wasn't sure how far we'd need to drive to get a signal, but I was starting to lose it. After a few whispered conversations, we decided it would be best to leave. We slowly began packing up our things when we noticed something else was missing. My wallet. My entire wallet was gone. I was furious. Not only had this intruder taken our food, but now my wallet too. What were they planning to do with it? It was a 2-hour drive to the nearest town. Where would they go? I knew I had to confront whoever this was. We had a pretty good idea they were hiding in the attic, but how would we get up there? My girlfriend and I stepped outside and walked around the cabin. That's when we found a small hatch at the back. It was propped open with a small stick, confirming that someone was indeed up there. Slowly, I mustered the courage to open the hatch. Flashlight in hand, I opened it and shined the light inside. What I saw horrified me. In the corner, in the dark, was a small, rat-like man. He nearly squeaked when the light hit him. I won't lie, I nearly lost it, but I kept my composure and shouted at him to throw my wallet back. I didn't care if he kept the cash, I just wanted my wallet. To my surprise, he tossed it over. I grabbed it, feeling utterly disgusted, and we quickly packed everything into the car and drove off. We never returned. When we finally got a signal, we called the cabin's owner and told him about the man. He was very apologetic, saying he had no idea anyone was living there and promised to send the authorities to deal with it. We didn't ask for a refund or anything. We just felt extremely creeped out knowing there had been a stranger living above us that night. Who knows what he could have done if he really wanted to. But the question that still haunts me is, how did he get in when we locked the door? About 7 years ago, on a weekend, my wife, Claire, and our 3 young sons were staying at the cabin we had purchased about 6 months prior. Right from the start, we noticed strange things. Shadows flickering, lights behaving oddly, and movements that didn't make sense. One evening, around 10:30, everyone went to bed, and I snuck into the kitchen to grab a piece of the cookies my wife had baked earlier. As I was cutting a slice, I heard a soft, woman's voice whispering, "Hey, what are you doing here?" It startled me, so I called out, "Claire," without turning around. When I looked, she wasn't there. I brushed it off and kept cutting the cookie. But then I heard another whisper, this time clearer, "Hey, are you going to eat that cookie? I want one too." I quickly looked around but saw no one. Feeling uneasy, I hurried back to the bedroom and jumped into bed. Claire was still awake and hadn't been in the kitchen asking for cookies. About 10 minutes later, I forced myself to go back and clean up my mess. But this time, nothing happened. The following night, everything was calm until I laid down. As I was on my side, I felt a slight tug on my sleeve. I turned my head and heard a faint whisper, "Mom, Dad." I immediately went to check on the boys across the hall, but they were all fast asleep. I also heard more murmurs that were hard to make out. I left a recorder running in the kitchen overnight, but I haven't listened to it yet. Part of me wonders if someone could have been whispering through the vents. We're on a secluded road with only a few empty cabins nearby, so it would be hard for someone to pull off such a prank. Still, who knows for sure? As a side note, my good friend had a similar experience when he was younger. He was staying at his cabin when a random woman, clearly drunk and drugged, wandered in the dark and started whispering through the fence. He woke up to see a ghostly pale face only inches away from him, whispering. Needless to say, it terrified him just as it would anyone. Did your village ever have any legends like the one about the old shack in the forest or the eerie road where people claim to see spirits? Well, mine sure did, especially the one about the shack. When I was growing up, there was a rumor that just south of the abandoned school, deep in the forest, there was a shack that had been left untouched for years. The tale was that some terrible murders occurred there a long time ago, and after that, nobody ever returned. But if no one went back, how could they know what happened, right? Still, it was a story that really got the kids talking, especially me. One summer, my friends and I were completely bored, and this story suddenly popped into my head. There wasn't much to do in our small town of about 150 people, especially before everyone had smartphones, so we decided to check out the shack. We were all excited, packing our bags and grabbing anything we thought we'd need for the trip. But as we got ready, the sun set, and we realized we'd have to wait until the following day. The next morning, we met up behind the old schoolhouse and began our walk. We found what looked like a faint trail, maybe used long ago, but now almost covered by plants. The trail led to a small open area before disappearing, so we kept walking straight ahead, or at least we thought we were, so we wouldn't get lost. One of my friends, being cautious, started marking trees with chalk to help us find our way back if needed. It was a smart idea, but with so many trees, I wasn't sure it would actually work. We walked for about 2.5 hours. According to the stories, the shack was supposed to be only about an hour's walk south, so I began to worry that we had gone too far and missed it. After walking for 15, the long journey without finding anything really made us feel like giving up, and we were definitely getting tired. Just as we were about to turn back, one of my friends spotted what looked like part of an old path, barely visible beneath the plants. This gave us new energy, and after another 20 minutes, we finally found the shack. We couldn't believe it, we had actually found the shack from the stories, the one where those murders were said to have happened. My friend quickly pulled out his camera and began snapping photos while we all celebrated. Now came the big moment. We wanted to see what was inside. The shack was tightly boarded up, with every window and door sealed shut. We circled the shack but couldn't find any way in. Then, my friend noticed a small window that looked like it might be breakable. He grabbed it, and after some effort, managed to pull it open. It wasn't very big, so only one of us could fit through. Our friend Evan, who was small and thin, volunteered. Using a flashlight, we could see a dirt floor and some stairs going down. We told Evan that if anything went wrong, we would pull him back up. He squeezed through the window, with his shoulders being the hardest part, and carefully went down the old stairs. Once inside, we realized we had a problem. The boards over the windows and doors were too secure for him to remove from the inside. But there was one small kitchen window that hadn't been nailed shut properly. And with some effort, we managed to loosen the nails enough to open it and get inside. The shack was creepy, like no one had been there for ages. Dishes were still in the sink, covered in a black grime that had dried up long ago. Shoes were scattered around, and there were decorations still hanging up, but everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. After checking the downstairs, we decided we had to see the upstairs, the part of the house everyone avoided. The stairs looked fragile, so we sent Evan up first to check if they would hold his weight. Step by step, he made it to the top, and one by one, we followed. There were only 2 rooms upstairs, and it was obvious that neither had been used in a long time. No blood stains or anything like the story claimed, just old beds, cabinets, shoes, and clothes full of holes from moths. While I was alone in one of the rooms, something shiny caught my eye under the bed. I bent down and saw what looked like a metal object, its surface dull with age. As I reached for it, I clearly heard two words in a woman's voice: "Get out." The fact that there wasn't a single girl with us on this trip really unnerved me. I froze looking around, but no one was there. Telling myself it was just my imagination, I left the object where it was and headed downstairs, out through the kitchen window. I was the first one out and didn't want to go back in. Eventually, my friends joined me, losing interest in the inside of the shack. We all agreed it was super creepy and decided it was time to leave. Before we left, we pulled the board back over the kitchen window and did our best to hammer the nails back in with a small rock, hoping it would hold for the next group of kids who might come looking. As we walked away, I couldn't help but glance back at the shack, at the window of the room where I'd heard that strange voice. I swear I saw a face looking back at me for a split second before it vanished. I'm not sure if it was just my imagination or something else, but none of my friends said they saw anything, so I kept it to myself. Even now, I'm not sure what I saw, but it definitely made me wonder if I had encountered something supernatural. One night, this isn't my own tale, but one from a friend of mine who went camping with me. We were in the same cabin, staying up late until we grew tired and finally went to sleep. My friend Lucas and I had sneaked a few instant coffee packets from the kitchen and mixed them with water late at night. Lucas didn't handle caffeine as well as I did, so he stayed up longer after the rest of us had dozed off. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he had brought a book and intended to read until he felt sleepy. Around 1 a.m., when we were all deep in sleep, we were suddenly startled by the loudest scream. Lucas was crying and trembling in his sleeping bag, and everyone in our cabin rushed to see what was wrong. His scream was so loud that it probably woke up the other cabins and even the camp leaders, and his sobbing afterward surely did too. Once the camp leaders came into our cabin, I stayed on my bunk to avoid getting trampled. Lucas told us he had seen a ghost moving around our cabin. He also mentioned hearing a gust of wind as the ghost moved. Another guy in our cabin turned to him and said he had heard the same thing. Lucas was sent home the next day, but the rest of us stayed at camp. However, the whole experience left us feeling uneasy. When we got back home, I talked with him a lot, and he told me more about what had happened. I found it strange because Lucas is one of the most honest people I know, and he seemed genuinely shaken by the event. I wondered if it could have been the coffee's effect, but we had the same drink the night before, and I didn't experience any hallucinations. Plus, he regularly drank coffee because he liked the taste even though it kept him up. He told me that when he looked at the ghost for about 3 seconds, he was too stunned to react. The ghost wasn't like anything you see in the movies. It was see-through and barely noticeable. The most disturbing part was that it looked like a little boy, but he wasn't wearing our camp uniform, just very old-fashioned clothes. Lucas said he wasn't exactly scared of the boy during those 3 seconds, just shocked because it was a ghost. But what really unsettled him was when, after those 3 seconds, the ghost boy stared at him with hollow, lifeless eyes and then rushed out of the cabin. That was when he and the other guy heard the sound of wind. I still remember what Lucas said clearly, because if I were him, I'd question everything I knew. He told me that the ghost looked at him with no emotion, and though it lasted only a moment, it felt like it stretched on forever. He was sure his mind wasn't playing tricks on him because he saw those eyes. There was no soul in them, like it had been taken away. That thought terrified me, and I felt really bad for him. Those were the details he shared, and I don't think he'll ever go camping again. My mom and two older brothers would often visit my aunt and her three children around Christmas time. Our whole extended family would gather together, uncles, aunts, and everyone else. They lived in a remote area in Scotland, near a place called Black Isle, though the village of Cresty is the actual name, but Black Isle is more commonly known. The area had some strange rumors about being a place where witches held rituals and made animal sacrifices on Halloween. These tales spoke of things that happened a long time ago, but no one really knew if they were true. For the family gathering, we rented a holiday home just down the road from my cousin's house. It was a large place with several bedrooms, making it perfect for hosting a big group. My older brother, his friend from Africa, and I shared a room. While they slept peacefully, I found myself unable to do the same. Suddenly, I woke up and couldn't figure out why. I squinted, trying to see in the dark, but everything was pitch black except for the sounds of my brother and his friend snoring. Then, the door to the room creaked open slowly, and a deep feeling of fear hit me. I didn't see anyone enter, but as I tried to focus, I noticed shadowy shapes moving around the room, especially near the two other beds, hovering above them. At least 3 of these shadows were present, and one stood close to my bed. Though it didn't have clear human features, I could feel as though it was staring straight at me. I decided the best thing to do was to turn over and face the wall, trying to convince myself to sleep. The next morning, I told a few family members about it, but most of them laughed, saying it might have been witches and brushed it off. The only one who took me seriously was my brother's girlfriend. She said she had felt something similar. While sleeping in the room next to ours, she felt as though someone had sat on the edge of her bed, pressing down on her legs, but when she looked, no one was there. Feeling uneasy, I decided to check the guest book to see if anyone else had reported any strange happenings, but I found nothing. That night will always stay with me, and if you ever find yourself near the Black Isle or staying in that holiday home, be cautious of any unusual shadows in your room. When I was 12 years old, my family and I went on a trip to visit my grandparents who lived in a small house tucked away in the woods by a quiet pond. The mornings there offered stunning views, and since there was no internet, only an old TV from the early 90s with a few channels and a VCR, I decided to bring a friend with me. My grandmother, who loved scary movies, had a large collection of VHS tapes. The house was about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town and about 6 hours from our home. The drive was pleasant, and we arrived around 7 p.m. My friend and I were excited to be there, and as soon as we got out of the car, I ran to hug my grandparents. They showed us to our sleeping arrangements, which were in a spacious room upstairs with 1 bed, a bathroom, and a balcony overlooking the pond. It was winter, and it snowed at night, but I tend to get warm easily, so I opened the window to let in some cool air. After we settled in, my dad handed us our luggage, and my friend took it upstairs while I waited for my grandmother to make hot chocolate. I asked if we could watch a movie before bed, and she agreed but reminded us to keep the volume down. After enjoying our hot chocolate and a shower, our parents and grandparents went to bed. My friend and I decided to watch a horror movie, picking Friday the 13th. It was nice to relax before sleeping. After the movie, I closed the door and we both went to bed. The next morning, I woke up around 8 o'clock and hurried downstairs for breakfast, then got ready for a walk. It was a sunny day despite the snow, though still a little chilly. We asked my grandparents and dad if we could walk on the trail, and they agreed, telling us to stick to the path. My grandmother packed us a bag with drinks and snacks in case we got hungry. After breakfast, we started walking slowly through the woods. Almost an hour later, we decided to take a break and sat on a large rock to eat. As we sat there, we suddenly heard a strange loud noise coming from a few miles ahead. We exchanged looks, stood up, and started walking toward the sound. Soon, we noticed blood on the snow. At first, I thought it might have been a fox that had caught a rabbit, so we kept walking. Then we heard a faint voice of a girl calling for help and asking if anyone was there. My friend, feeling uneasy, suggested we might be making a mistake by continuing, but I reassured her that the girl was probably just lost. We kept walking, calling out to her like the curious 12-year-olds we were. Eventually, we heard the voice again and started running toward it. I tripped over a rock and fell into the snow, which made my friend laugh. When I got up, my friend pointed out a small, run-down cabin ahead of us. We thought it would be a good idea to check it out, so we went inside. The cabin was creepy, with clothes, shoes, and other personal items scattered around, along with old, rotting food and cobweb-covered dishes. It was clear the place had been abandoned for a long time. We kept exploring and came across a room that sent chills down our spines. Chains were fastened to the walls, and there was a bed with straps on it. Blood stains covered the floor and walls. Horrified, we screamed when we suddenly saw a girl standing by the door, whispering for help. Terrified, we bolted out of the cabin and ran back to the trail without stopping. We decided not to tell our parents or grandparents what we had seen because we were afraid we would get in trouble. Instead, we went back to our room, talked about the scary experience, and tried to distract ourselves by watching more movies. That night, exhausted from the day's events and our movie marathon, we went to bed. But I was startled awake by a scream. I saw my friend standing by the balcony, and I asked her why she screamed, warning her that our parents might get upset. She said it wasn't her who screamed, but the girl by the pond. She claimed to have seen the same girl, along with others, standing by the water and calling for help. Frightened, I closed the door and we huddled inside. Just then, my mom and dad came into our room, concerned about why we were crying. We told them about the girls we had seen, and soon my grandmother joined us, reassuring us that there was no one outside. She insisted that if anyone had been out there, they would have heard the screams too, as they were sitting outside. My friend then mentioned seeing the girl during our walk, and my dad asked where we had seen her. Hesitantly, we described what had happened. My grandmother's expression changed, and she sat us down to tell us a chilling story. Years ago, there had been a series of murders in the area. A man had kidnapped young girls, held them captive in that very cabin, and done terrible things before killing them. Although he was caught and imprisoned, the remains of the victims were never found. To this day, I still wonder if those girls were reaching out to us, trying to get us to help find their bodies, or if they were spirits still searching for peace. No one should ever have to suffer what they did.